My husband called me 56 minutes before his sister was supposed to walk down the aisle and told me to stay away from the wedding. That was the first shock. The second came when he admitted he knew I was already halfway there. The third came when his mother took the phone and said the family had finally corrected the mistake he made when he married me. I was driving west on Interstate 10 toward Fredericksburg in a silver sport utility vehicle that still smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner used at the base car wash. I had changed out of my uniform in a restroom near Joint Base San Antonio. My dress was dark green, simple, and comfortable enough to stand through a long ceremony. My uniform hung behind me in a garment bag. Behind the rear seats rode a large blue enameled Dutch oven. A cream ribbon wrapped the box. It was the wedding gift for my sister-in-law, Lauren. She had once told me that every hard week felt less hard after a bowl of soup, so I had bought her the best pot I could find. The ceremony started at 4:30 at Mercer Ridge, the event property owned by my mother-in-law. My dashboard clock said 3:34 when the call came through. Evan was on speaker. I asked him to repeat himself. He said, "Do not come to the wedding." I looked at the line of brake lights ahead of me. We were crawling past Bourne under a hard blue September sky. The temperature gauge on the dashboard read hot enough to make the horizon shimmer. I said, "Evan, I am already on the road." He answered, "I know." There were voices behind him. Glasses touched. A door opened and closed. Someone called for more flowers near the entrance. It sounded like the final busy hour before a wedding, which was exactly what it was. I asked, "Did something happen to Lauren?" He said, "No, Lauren is fine." "Then why are you telling me not to come?" He let out a breath that sounded more irritated than ashamed. He said, "Because this day needs to be easy. Mom does not want questions. I do not want a scene. You are better off staying where you are." I said, "I took leave for this. I changed clothes at work. The gift is in the car." His voice went colder. He said, "Nora, you do not belong at Mercer Ridge today." I remember my right hand tightening around the steering wheel. I remember a white pickup passing in the next lane. I remember a paper cup rolling across the floor near the passenger seat every time traffic moved. What I do not remember is breathing. Before I answered, Marlene spoke in the background and told Evan to hand her the phone. The speaker crackled. Then her familiar, smooth voice came through. Marlene could make cruelty sound like a church announcement. She said, "Nora, this family has spent 13 years adjusting itself around your schedule, your deployments, your emergencies, and your uniform. Evan made a mistake when he married you. Today is not the day we are going to pretend otherwise." I waited for my husband to take the phone back. He did not. I waited for him to tell her she had gone too far. He did not do that either. Then Marlene added something that seemed strange at the time. She said, "We need people to leave here believing the right things. Your presence would complicate that." The line went quiet. I asked, "What exactly are people supposed to believe?" Evan took the phone again. He said, "Just go home." Then he ended the call. I drove another mile before I trusted myself to leave the interstate. I pulled into a roadside travel plaza and parked at the far end, away from the families buying cold drinks and bags of ice. A retired couple sat. The man peeled an orange while the woman read a paperback. They looked peaceful in the unremarkable way that only becomes noticeable when your own life has split open. I shut down the vehicle. Over 13 years, I had explained Evan to myself. He was caught between his wife and his mother. He did not understand military obligations. He wanted a quieter life. He hated conflict. Marlene was controlling. Lauren avoided arguments. Weddings made people tense. Money made people worse. There is always another excuse available when you are determined to protect someone from the consequences of who they have become. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was 49 years old. There were silver threads at my temples that no amount of careful parting could hide. I wore small gold earrings that Marlene had once called government-issued jewelry. My lipstick had worn off in the center because I had eaten half a turkey sandwich while answering email. I did not call Evan back. I did not drive to the wedding to demand a seat. I started the engine, crossed under the interstate, and headed east towards San Antonio. At the base gate, the security forces airman checked my identification and glanced at the garment bag behind me. He said, "I thought you were gone for the weekend." I said, "Plans failed inspection." He gave me a puzzled smile and waved me through. By 5:12, I was back inside my office. The building was almost empty. The air conditioning hummed over rows of gray desks. A printer blinked because someone had left a tray open. Outside, a cargo aircraft moved slowly along the taxiway, broad and steady against the evening light. I had spent most of my adult life moving people and equipment through bad weather, broken roads, short timelines, and incomplete information. I knew how to work a problem. That afternoon, however, I did not know what the problem was. At 7:26, my phone began to vibrate across the desk. Evan called first, then Marlene, then Evan again. Lauren called last. I answered because her wedding day had already been damaged enough. She was crying so hard that her words came apart. She said, "Nora, please tell me you did not sign it." I sat straighter. I asked, "Sign what?" There was a long pause. I heard a door shut behind her and the music from the reception became muffled. Lauren said, "The loan, the one on Mercer Ridge. Mr. Bell says your name is on the guarantee and your house is listed as collateral." For a moment, I thought she had mistaken me for someone else. I said, "I have not signed any loan." Her breathing stopped. Then she whispered, "He says your signature is already in the file. Before I tell you what I found in that file, tell me what you would have done. Would you have turned around as I did? Or would you have driven straight to that wedding and made them explain themselves in front of everyone?" Lauren stayed on the line, but neither of us spoke for several seconds. I looked through the dark window at the runway lights coming on one by one. I had spent a career tracing lost cargo by tail number, timestamp, initials, and destination. By the next morning, I would be tracing something far more personal. I would be tracing my own name. I left the base after 8 and drove to the small brick house I had bought in Universal City 2 years before I met Evan. The porch light came on automatically as I pulled into the driveway. Across the street, Samuel Ortiz was closing his garage. He was 79, retired from aircraft maintenance, and still kept every wrench in a painted outline on the wall. He lifted one hand. I lifted mine. Samuel looked at the dress, the garment bag, and the boxed gift. He did not ask a question. Men who spent 40 years around aircraft learn that a strange noise will identify itself soon enough. I carried the Blue Dutch oven inside and set it beside the coat closet. It remained there, ribbon untouched, like a piece of evidence no one had labeled yet. I made coffee. Some people reach for wine when a marriage turns inside out. I have never trusted a solution that makes the morning less clear. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone face down and tried to understand the words Lauren had used. Loan, guarantee, collateral, my house. Evan and I met 14 years earlier at a military family financial workshop. That detail would become bitterly funny later. I had been a major then, newly assigned to Texas after several years overseas. The workshop was held in a hotel conference room near the Riverwalk. I was there to answer questions about deployment support and emergency allowances. Evan was a commercial loan officer for a regional bank. He had been invited to explain credit scores, mortgages, and why no one should sign paperwork they had not read. He was good in front of a room. Calm voice, neat suit, the kind of smile that made older customers believe he remembered their children. During a break, he looked at the stack of color-coded folders under my arm and asked whether I organized my groceries by national stock number. I told him only the expensive ones. He laughed. I did too. We had dinner 2 weeks later. He said he admired the way I made difficult systems sound simple. I said I admired the way he could explain interest without making everyone feel foolish. For a while, we seemed well matched. I tracked what moved. He tracked what money cost. The first person to object was Marlene. She owned Mercer Ridge, a limestone event hall and small vineyard outside Fredericksburg. She had inherited part of the land from her parents and spent years turning it into a place where people paid good money to stand beneath oak trees and promise each other forever. Marlene believed appearances were not part of the business. She believed appearances were the business. The first Thanksgiving after Evan and I became engaged, she set engraved napkin rings at every place. His said Evan. Lauren had her name. Even the family dog had a small brass tag tied to the back of a chair. Mine, said Officer. Evan smiled as if it were a harmless joke. Marlene said, I was not sure what else to call you. You are never here long enough to learn your preferences. I had missed one Sunday lunch because a hurricane changed course. That should have told me something. After we married, the comments became more polished. When I deployed for 6 months, Marlene told relatives that Evan had been abandoned. When I returned, she asked whether the Air Force offered classes on becoming a proper wife again. When I was promoted to lieutenant colonel, she said the rank sounded impressive, but probably made me even less available. When our team helped move medical supplies after severe flooding along the coast, she told Lauren that I always found disasters more interesting than family. Evan used the same sentence for years. He would say, "You know how she is." I did know how she was. What I failed to ask was how he had decided to be. Lauren was different. She was 8 years younger than Evan and had learned early that peace in the Mercer family meant letting Marlene have the last word. Lauren worked as an elementary school counselor. She could sit with a frightened child for an hour, yet one sharp look from her mother could reduce her to silence. She had a 9-year-old daughter named Maisie from an earlier marriage. Maisie asked direct questions because no one had trained the courage out of her yet. At Christmas, she once asked Marlene why my stocking hung in the hallway instead of over the fireplace with everyone else. Marlene answered, "Because Nora is usually somewhere else." Maisie moved it herself. No one mentioned it, but I remembered. I loved Lauren in the careful way one loves a person who is kind in private and absent when kindness becomes expensive. She sent birthday cards. She remembered when I was deployed. She asked for advice when Maisie wanted to join a youth aviation program. Yet when Marlene insulted me across the dinner table, Lauren studied her plate. I understood fear. I did not confuse it with innocence. My work did make family life difficult. That part was true. I served as a contingency logistics officer at Joint Base San Antonio. My office coordinated the movement of fuel equipment, medical cargo, repair parts, field shelters, and people when ordinary systems failed. During hurricane season, plans changed by the hour. A flooded highway could turn a 12-hour delivery into a 3-day problem. One missing generator could close a clinic. One incorrect weight on a cargo manifest could keep an aircraft on the ground. I was not heroic. I was methodical. My favorite tool was a red grease pencil. It could mark plastic sleeves, maps, glass, and laminated checklists. When a date did not match, I circled it. When a destination changed, I drew one clean line through the old one. I taught young officers never to erase the history of a decision. A record should show how the truth changed. Evan used to tease me about that pencil. He called it my little red judge. I told him paper did not judge anyone. It simply remembered. During the last year of our marriage, he had begun asking more questions about my retirement. How much would my pension be? Could I retire the following spring? Was the house worth more than when I bought it? Had I ever considered a home equity line for renovations? I answered some questions and ignored others. Couples discussed money. Nothing about the conversation seemed criminal at the time. 3 months before the wedding, he brought home a leather portfolio with a stack of forms inside. He said the bank was updating household information for employees and spouses. I flipped through the first few pages. The signature page was there, but several schedules behind it were blank. I told him I would sign when the packet was complete. He said I was being difficult. I said blank paper had never earned my trust. He took the portfolio upstairs and locked it in the bottom drawer of his desk. That should have told me something too. A month later, I noticed our prior year tax return was missing from the fire safe. Evan said he had scanned it for our accountant and would put it back. I accepted the explanation because he handled most of our taxes and because marriage is built from 1,000 small acts of trust. No one can inspect every one of them without turning a home into a checkpoint. Then Mercer Ridge began having problems. Marlene blamed rising insurance costs, storm repairs, and couples choosing smaller weddings. Evan spent more evenings at the property. He said he was helping restructure vendor contracts. Lauren told me her mother had taken out a short-term business note after replacing the roof and expanding the kitchen. At Easter, Marlene asked whether I had ever thought about adding Evan to the deed on my house. I said no. She stirred sugar into her tea and said, "A wife should not keep one foot outside the marriage." I answered, "A deed is not a foot." Evan kicked my shoe beneath the table. On the drive home, he said I had embarrassed her. I asked why she needed to know about my deed. He said she was making conversation. That dog did not hunt, but I let it run into the brush anyway. The wedding plans grew larger as the summer went on. Marlene wanted Mercer Ridge to look successful. New landscaping appeared, the ballroom received fresh paint, a stone sign was installed near the road. Evan said vendors had agreed to delayed payment because the wedding would showcase the property to future clients. I offered to help Lauren with transportation for older guests. She thanked me. Marlene declined and hired a shuttle company. I offered to host a small breakfast the morning after the wedding. Marlene said the schedule was already full. I offered nothing else. Even so, I took leave 6 weeks in advance. I showed Evan the approved request. I bought the green dress. I ordered the Dutch oven. I wrote a note to Lauren and Maisie about meals shared after difficult days. 2 nights before the wedding, Evan asked whether I could arrive late. I asked why. He said his regional supervisor, Thomas Bell, would be attending and business talk might make the family tense. I reminded him that I had met bankers before. He said, "That is not what I mean." I asked what he did mean. He told me to forget it. The night before the wedding, he slept at Mercer Ridge because the sound system needed attention. At least that was what he told me. I went to bed alone and woke before dawn to a message from him. Wear civilian clothes. Please, do not mention the base. Mom wants the day to feel normal. I read the message twice. Then I put on my uniform and went to work because I had a morning briefing before leave began. At noon, I changed into the green dress. At 3:34, he told me not to come. At 7:26, Lauren told me my signature was on a loan. By midnight, I had stopped asking whether the wedding had exposed a family disagreement. I had started wondering whether it had interrupted a plan. The next morning began with a cargo conference at 6:45. Chief Master Sergeant Rosa Delgado stood at the front of the room with a dry erase marker in one hand and a paper cup in the other. Rosa had served long enough to distrust both optimistic schedules and coffee labeled mild. She pointed at a map of the Gulf Coast and asked whether we could move portable refrigeration units to Corpus Christi before the next storm system arrived. I said we could if the trucks left before noon and if maintenance released 2 trailers on time. She looked at me for half a second longer than necessary. Rosa said, "You were supposed to be on leave." I said, "The wedding changed its mind." No one laughed. Rosa capped the marker. She said, "We will discuss refrigeration first. Everything else can wait until you decide it cannot." That was as close as she came to asking a personal question. By 8, I was reviewing transportation requests. By 9, I had answered 3 calls from Evan without picking up. Marlene left a message that began with the words, "This has been blown out of proportion." I deleted it before she reached the second sentence. At 9:18, an alert appeared on my personal email. A lender had requested my credit file. The inquiry came from Hill Country Capital Services, a commercial finance affiliate that often worked with regional banks. The request had been made the previous Friday. I had not applied for credit. I closed my office door. Then I did what I had taught younger officers to do whenever a shipment went missing. I stopped guessing and built a timeline. I wrote the date of the inquiry at the top of a legal pad. Beneath it, I listed every financial conversation I could remember from the previous 6 months. Evan asking about retirement, Marlene asking about the deed, the incomplete signature packet, the missing tax return, Thomas Bell attending the wedding, the message asking me not to mention the base, the phone call telling me to stay away. I circled the final 2 items with my red grease pencil. At 10:14, Lauren called. Her voice was steadier than it had been the night before. That did not make what she said easier to hear. She told me the trouble began in the hotel lounge before the ceremony. Several guests had arrived early and were watching a college football game on television. During a commercial break, the local station aired a preview for a public affairs program about the summer flood response. My face appeared on the screen. I remembered the interview. A television crew had spent 2 days with our team while we coordinated the movement of generators, medical supplies, and temporary refrigeration to communities near the coast. I had expected a short segment buried late on a Sunday evening. I had not known the station planned to promote it during one of the most watched games of the weekend. The preview showed me standing inside a warehouse with a red grease pencil tucked behind one ear. It showed airmen loading pallets in the rain. It showed a convoy leaving before sunrise. At the end, the reporter said I had finally taken a weekend of approved leave to attend a family wedding in Fredericksburg. I closed my eyes when Lauren repeated that line. I had mentioned the wedding during the interview only because the reporter asked what I planned to do after the operation ended. It had seemed harmless. Lauren said her aunt recognized me first. Then a retired Air Force colonel named Paul Hanley stood closer to the television and confirmed it. He said, "That woman is married to Evan." Someone asked where I was. Marlene answered before Lauren could. She said, "Nora was not invited." The room went quiet in a way that frightened even Marlene. Evan tried to repair the damage. He told everyone an emergency at the base had kept me away. Then the reporter on the television said I was on approved leave. A few people looked at Evan, a few looked at Marlene, most looked at Lauren because it was her wedding and no one knew where else to put the discomfort. Lauren said she wanted the floor to open. I asked where Thomas Bell entered the story. She took a slow breath. Thomas was the regional credit director from the bank where Evan worked. He had been invited with his wife and seated near the family. When he heard that I had not been invited, he became confused. He said Evan had told him I would attend because there were a few final questions about the financing for Mercer Ridge. Lauren asked what financing. Thomas said the bridge loan secured in part by my personal guarantee and the equity in my home. I asked, "Did he say the amount?" Lauren answered, $486,000. I wrote the number in words on the legal pad. The loan was large enough to save Mercer Ridge and small enough to destroy my retirement if it failed, Lauren continued. Marlene told Thomas that I had approved everything but did not like discussing private finances. Evan tried to move him away from the group. Thomas refused. He said his files showed I would be present and that a final meeting had been planned for the following Tuesday. Then Maisie asked a question. She said, "If Aunt Nora signed it, why does she not know about it?" Children do not always understand when adults have agreed to protect a lie. Thomas looked at Evan. Evan looked at Marlene. Marlene told Maisie to go find the flower girl. Lauren heard enough to know something was wrong. She called me from a storage room while guests were being seated. I asked, "Did the ceremony happen?" She said yes. Daniel and Lauren were married under the oak trees. The music played. The photographer took pictures. People ate dinner. A wedding can continue long after the meaning has left it. But the questions did not stop. One guest asked why my name appeared on financing for a family property when I had been excluded from the family event. Another asked whether the lender had verified the signature. Paul Hanley, the retired colonel, said he had worked around government contracts for 30 years and had learned that signatures were where responsibility began, not where questions ended. Thomas Bell left before dinner. Evan disappeared twice to make phone calls. Marlene spent most of the reception telling people there had been a misunderstanding. Lauren said, "Nora, there is more." I waited. She said the office printer at Mercer Ridge had jammed during the afternoon. When Daniel cleared it that morning, he found several pages beneath the tray. He assumed they belonged to Evan and put them in the desk drawer. After Thomas left, Lauren remembered them. She had the pages. My name was on every one. I asked her not to photograph or send them electronically. She sounded surprised. I explained that originals mattered. Printer marks mattered. Staple holes mattered. Notes and margins mattered. A clean digital copy could hide the history of a document. I told her to place the pages in a plain envelope, avoid writing on them, and bring them to me when she could. That was the moment my training stopped being a job and became a shield. After we ended the call, I contacted each of the 3 nationwide credit bureaus and placed a security freeze. It cost nothing and would remain until I lifted it. I also placed a fraud alert and downloaded my credit reports. The inquiry from Hill Country Capital appeared on 2 of them. No new loan had been funded. That was the first good fact I had found. I called the number listed for the lender and asked for the fraud department. The representative would not discuss a commercial application over the telephone, which was exactly what a careful institution should have done. She gave me the name of a compliance officer and instructions for submitting an identity dispute. Then I called the legal assistance office on base. The attorney there explained that military legal assistance could advise me and help with referrals, but it could not represent me in a contested civilian divorce or a private lending dispute. She told me to preserve records, change passwords, and avoid confronting Evan until I understood the scope. I changed every password I could think of: banking, email, retirement accounts, insurance, cloud storage. I removed Evan as an authorized user where I legally could. I opened a separate checking account for my pay. I copied our recent statements and stored them outside the house. None of those steps felt dramatic. That is why they mattered. People imagine self-protection as a slammed door or a raised voice. Most of the time, it looks like a woman at a desk, reading every line before she clicks submit. At 4 that afternoon, Rosa knocked once and entered. She saw the legal pad, the red circles, and the credit reports. She said, "Is this a personal problem or a federal problem?" I said, "Personal so far." Rosa nodded. She said, "Then keep it personal. Do not use a government system to chase it. Use your own records and let the right people do their jobs." That was the best professional advice I received all week. I thanked her. She paused at the door. Then she said, "A missing pallet and a missing truth have one thing in common. Somebody knows where it went." The next morning, Lauren arrived at the visitor center carrying a brown envelope and looking as if she had not slept since the rehearsal dinner. I met her in a private conference room outside the secure work area. She wore jeans, flat shoes, and the same pearl hair clip she had worn at the wedding. One side of it was bent. For a few seconds, she held the envelope against her chest. Then she placed it on the table. She said, "I should have stopped this before Saturday." I asked, "How much did you know?" She said, "Not about the loan, about Mom wanting you gone." I knew that. I did not answer. Lauren looked at the floor. She said Marlene had argued for weeks that my presence would make Thomas Bell uncomfortable. Evan said I asked too many questions and would turn a family celebration into an audit. Lauren assumed they were exaggerating because they resented my work. I asked why she had not called me. She said, "I thought Evan would give in. He usually does after Mom wears herself out." I said, "He did not give in. He helped her." Lauren nodded. She opened the envelope. The first page was a financing summary for Mercer Ridge Holdings. The requested amount was $486,000. The stated purpose was to refinance a balloon note, pay overdue vendors, and provide working capital. The proposed guarantors were Evan Mercer and Nora Whitaker. My full middle name was not Elise. It was Elaine. I had signed thousands of official documents over the years. Evan knew my middle name. The error did not prove forgery by itself, but it showed carelessness. People who borrow the identity of another person often know the large facts and miss the small ones. The second page listed my military pay, estimated retirement income, and the value of my house. The house value was within a few $1,000s of the estimate Evan had asked me about at Easter. The third page described my home as available collateral for a future home equity lien. The fourth page contained a typed certification stating that I had reviewed the application and authorized the lender to verify my credit. Beneath it was a signature that looked almost like mine. Almost. The first letter leaned too far forward. The final stroke ended high instead of low. Most people would not have noticed. I did because my signature had been repeated on forms since I was 23. I took out the red grease pencil. Lauren watched as I circled the wrong middle name, the house value, the retirement estimate, and the signature date. The date was the Friday before the wedding. At the time shown on the electronic acknowledgement, I had been in a briefing room on base with 9 other people. That did not make remote authorization impossible. It made the story testable. The final page was an internal contact note. It said, "Spouse unavailable due to duty. Verbal approval confirmed through applicant. Final acknowledgement expected after family event." Applicant meant Evan. I read that sentence 3 times. Lauren said, "I am sorry." I answered, "Do not be sorry yet. Tell me how these pages reached the wedding office." She explained that Evan used the Mercer Ridge office to print loan documents because Marlene wanted everything ready before Thomas arrived. The printer jammed and produced duplicate pages. Daniel found them and placed them in a drawer. No one realized the copies remained there. The printer had done what frightened people failed to do. It kept a record. Lauren reached into her bag and removed a folded seating chart. My name had been printed at the family table, then covered with a white label. Beneath the label, the impression of the letters was still visible. Lauren said Maisie noticed Marlene removed the place card on Friday night. Maisie took the card from the trash and hid it in her suitcase. I asked why. Lauren gave a tired smile. She said Maisie told her that throwing away a name did not make the person disappear. I looked at the covered space on the seating chart. For years, I had believed the Mercers did not understand my value. The loan packet suggested something worse. They understood it well enough to use it. After Lauren left, I called the compliance officer named in the instructions from the lender. Her name was Renee Castillo. She spoke carefully and asked precise questions. Had I submitted an application? No. Had I authorized Evan to submit one for me? No. Had I given anyone permission to use my credit report? No. Had I agreed to pledge my home? No. Renee did not offer sympathy. She offered procedure, which I appreciated more. She told me the application had been suspended. She asked me to send a signed identity theft affidavit, copies of identification, proof of residence, and a written statement disputing the signature. She said the bank would preserve the electronic records and review how the application had been entered. Then she said, "For this kind of Texas home equity transaction, consent is not optional. The lender needs the agreement of each owner and the spouse of each owner. A typed name does not supply that agreement." I asked whether my house was in immediate danger. She said no lien had been created and no funds had been released. That was the second good fact. Then she asked a question that changed the shape of the entire case. She said, "Does Evan know you are eligible to retire next spring?" I said, "Yes." She said the application listed my expected retirement pay as a secondary source of repayment. It also stated that a portion of my retirement savings could be liquidated if the business missed payments. I felt the room grow smaller. I asked, "Who provided that information?" Renee said she could not discuss another applicant's statements while the review was open. She could only confirm what had been attributed to me. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I opened the locked drawer in the home office. Evan had taken the leather portfolio, but he had left a yellow notepad beneath it. The top sheet was blank. The pressure marks from a removed page were visible when I held it toward the window. I placed a soft pencil sideways and rubbed gently across the paper. Words appeared. Retirement date, house equity, closing Tuesday, Mercer Ridge, balance due September 25th, apartment October 1st. I sat very still. The wedding had been on September 13th. The loan closing was planned for 3 days later. The venue debt came due less than 2 weeks after that, and an apartment was supposed to begin 2 weeks after the wedding. I did not yet know whose apartment it was. I knew whose marriage had been scheduled around it. The attorney from the base gave me 3 names. I called all 3 and chose Patricia Givens because her receptionist asked whether I was safe before asking whether I could pay. Patricia practiced family law from a converted house near downtown San Antonio. She was 64, wore silver-framed glasses, and kept a bowl of peppermints on the conference table. Her office did not look dramatic. That suited me. I brought copies of the credit reports, the loan pages, the seating chart, the legal pad, and the rubbed impression from the notepad used by Evan. I also brought a list of every account, asset, debt, password change, and suspicious conversation I could remember. Patricia read without interrupting. When she finished, she placed both hands on the folder. She said, "A cruel telephone call is a marital event. A forged consent is evidence." I asked what I should do first. She said, "You already did several important things. You preserved the pages. You froze your credit. You separated your pay. You did not use government access to investigate a private matter. Now we make the record clean." She explained that a home equity loan against a Texas homestead required real consent from the people whose rights were involved. Evan could not create my consent by telling a lender that I had given it. The attempted transaction had not reached closing, but the application still mattered. She advised me to complete the affidavit from the lender, make an identity theft report, notify my own bank, and preserve the original documents with a written chain of custody. She also advised me not to destroy or alter anything I found in the shared home. Then she asked the question I had been avoiding. She said, "Do you want to remain married while this is investigated?" I looked at the wrong middle name on the loan packet. I thought about the place card in a trash bin. I thought about Marlene saying they needed people to believe the right things. I said, "No." Patricia nodded once. Texas generally required a waiting period of at least 60 days after a divorce petition was filed before a court could finish the case. Patricia warned me that money disputes could make it take longer. She did not promise speed. Good attorneys rarely promise what a court controls. I signed the petition that afternoon. I did not feel powerful. I felt accurate. The next 2 days were mostly paperwork. I submitted the dispute to Hill Country Capital. I made the identity theft report. I requested copies of my own records. I moved important documents to a safe deposit box. I photographed the contents of the home office before touching anything. I printed messages from Evan and Marlene and saved them in more than one place. At work, I kept doing my job. A tropical system formed in the Gulf. 2 vehicles needed repair. A vendor delivered the wrong size electrical connectors. A young captain forgot to account for the weight of water in portable tanks and looked as if his career had ended when I caught it. I told him, "Fix the number before the aircraft moves. That is what review is for." Then I went back to my office and wondered how many times I had offered Evan the same chance. He came to the house on Wednesday evening. I had changed the code on the garage door, so he had to knock. When I opened the front door, he stood on the porch with the leather portfolio under one arm. His tie was loose and his face looked gray around the mouth. He asked whether he could come inside. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. I said, "We can talk here." He looked toward the house across the street where Samuel lived. I said, "Samuel cannot hear us. He also knows how to mind his business, which is more than I can say for your loan department." Evan winced. He said, "I did not come to fight." I asked why he had come. He said, "To explain." I waited. He began with the wedding. He said Marlene had been panicking. Thomas Bell was asking questions. The venue debt was worse than Lauren knew. Vendors were threatening liens. The balloon note on the property came due in 12 days. If the refinancing failed, Marlene could lose land that had been in the family for generations. I asked, "How much of your money is in it?" His eyes changed. That was the right question. He said, $94,000. The money came from the inheritance his father left him. Evan had invested it in Mercer Ridge over 3 years without telling me the full amount. Marlene had promised he would be repaid after refinancing. I asked, "So you risked $94,000 of your own money, then decided to risk my house as well?" He said, "It is our house." I answered, "It was mine before I knew your name. Marriage gave you a home. It did not give you my signature." He looked down at the portfolio. Then he said the application was preliminary. Nothing had closed. No one had lost money. He had expected to discuss the final documents with me after the wedding. I asked why my signature was already there. He said an employee had inserted a sample signature to move the file forward. I asked which employee. He could not answer. I asked why the application said he had confirmed my verbal approval. He said he believed I would approve once I understood the situation. I asked why he told Thomas I would attend the wedding. He said Thomas wanted to meet me informally. I asked why he then banned me from the wedding. Evan rubbed both hands over his face. He said, "Because you would have said no before I had time to explain." There it was. He had not excluded me because my presence would cause a scene. He excluded me because my presence would supply an answer. I said, "You used my name because you knew the real owner of it would refuse." He opened the portfolio and removed a document. It was a borrower acknowledgement prepared by the lender. The language stated that I had been aware of the application and that any irregular signature had resulted from an administrative misunderstanding. Evan said, "If you sign this, the bank may keep the file open. We can remove the house as collateral and restructure the guarantee." I asked, "Who is we?" He said, "The family." I looked through the glass beside the door. The boxed Dutch oven was still visible near the closet. I said, "Your family made its position clear on Saturday." He said, "Nora, do not punish Mom for one terrible decision." I answered, "A decision has one moment." This had tax returns, credit inquiries, income estimates, a fake signature, a lender, and a closing date. That is a project plan. He flinched because he knew I was right. Then he tried a different argument. He said he loved me. He said he had been frightened. He said Marlene had depended on him since his father died. He said the venue was the only thing she had left. He said losing the loan could end his career. I listened. When he finished, I asked whether he had planned to leave me after the closing. His face went still. I had not told him about the notepad. He said, "What are you talking about?" I answered, "Apartment October 1st. He looked at the street. That was all the confirmation I needed. He said the apartment was only a possibility. He had been unhappy. He wanted space. He did not want a separation to overshadow the wedding of Lauren, so he planned to wait until after the event. I almost admired the efficiency. He wanted my income before the closing, my absence during the wedding, and my silence during the separation. He had scheduled each version of me for a different task. I said, "Leave the acknowledgement on the porch if you want my attorney to see it. I will not sign it." He asked, "You have an attorney?" I opened the door. I said, "Now you understand how it feels to learn that someone else has been planning your future." He did not leave the paper. He carried it back to his car. The following afternoon, Lauren came to see me again. This time Daniel drove her. He waited in the parking lot while we sat beneath a covered walkway near the visitor center. Lauren held her phone in both hands. She said, "I found the rest." Evan had used an email account connected to the Mercer Ridge office. Lauren knew the password because she handled event inquiries during busy weekends. She had searched after seeing the printed loan pages. I told her she should not keep accessing the account once she knew a dispute existed. She said she had already stopped and had preserved what she saw. One message was from an apartment manager in San Antonio. It confirmed a one-bedroom unit available on October 1st and thanked Evan for the deposit. Another message attached a draft separation proposal. The document gave Evan possession of his personal vehicle, his retirement accounts, and repayment rights tied to Mercer Ridge. It assumed I would keep the house and accept responsibility for any debt attached to it. The draft was dated 2 days before the wedding. The worst message was from Marlene. It said, "Keep Nora away from Thomas until Tuesday. Once the money clears, she can be angry from her own house." Lauren started crying before I finished reading. She said, "I did not know they were doing this." I believed her. Then she said, "I still helped them by staying quiet." I believed that too. I asked what Marlene had told her about the debt. Lauren said the property owed nearly $400,000 on the balloon note and more than $70,000 to vendors. The requested loan would cover both and leave a small reserve. Without it, Marlene would have to sell quickly or face foreclosure. I asked why the wedding had become so important. Lauren looked ashamed. She said it was meant to prove Mercer Ridge was still desirable. Thomas Bell had been invited partly as a guest and partly as an audience. Marlene had filled the room with church leaders, business owners, military retirees, and prospective clients. She wanted photographs, praise, and future bookings. She also wanted Thomas to see a stable family behind the loan. My uniform had been useful when Marlene advertised veteran appreciation events. My income had been useful in the loan application. My absence had been useful at the wedding. The one thing that had never been useful was my voice. Lauren said, "I am going to tell Daniel everything." I asked, "Everything about what?" She looked toward the parking lot where her new husband waited. She said, "About how often I let Mom decide what truth was convenient. I do not want that in my marriage." That was the first honest thing to come out of the wedding. By Friday, Hill Country Capital had confirmed in writing that the loan application was frozen and no lien existed on my property. The bank had opened an internal review. Evan was placed on administrative leave from his position while investigators examined how the documents entered the system. I did not announce any of it. I did not post online. I did not call wedding guests. I did not contact Marlene Church. Still, consequences traveled. They traveled through the people who had heard Thomas Bell ask about my guarantee. They traveled through vendors who learned the refinancing had stopped. They traveled through employees at the bank where Evan worked who knew a compliance review was underway. They traveled through the Veterans Charity Board where Marlene had used my rank and photograph in fundraising brochures without asking me. Truth has no need for a publicity budget when enough people have seen the original document. The following Tuesday, a retired loadmaster stopped me outside the base exchange. His name was Curtis Neal. We had worked together during flood operations years earlier. He said he had heard a version of the wedding story from Paul Hanley. I told him versions were dangerous. He nodded. Then he said, "Paper is dangerous too, but only to the person who hoped nobody would read it." He asked whether I needed anything. I said no. He answered, That was not my question. I asked whether you needed anything. I thought for a moment. Then I asked him to recommend a locksmith. He wrote a name on the back of a grocery receipt. That evening, the locks were changed. 2 days later, Evan and Marlene came together. I saw their cars before I reached my driveway. The sedan, driven by Evan, was parked at the curb. The sport utility vehicle driven by Marlene sat behind it. Samuel was sweeping his front walk with the concentration of a man trying not to become a witness. I parked in the garage and entered through the side door. I set my briefcase inside, took a breath, and walked out to the porch. Evan stood first. Marlene remained seated in a patio chair she had moved from beside my door. Even in crisis, she arranged the furniture. Evan said, "We need 5 minutes." I said, "You have until I decide you do not." Marlene rose. Her hair was perfect. Her hands were not. She kept turning a gold ring around her finger. She said, "Nora, I owe you an apology." I asked, "For which part?" She blinked. I said, "The wedding call, the discarded place card, the credit inquiry, the false signature, the attempt to use my home, or the message about letting me be angry after the money cleared." Her face changed when I mentioned the message. That was the first layer. Marlene said she had spoken badly because she was frightened. She said family land was about to be lost. She said she had believed Evan would explain the financing to me later. I asked, "Did you believe I had agreed?" She looked at Evan. I said, "Please answer," without checking his face. She admitted she knew I had not agreed yet. That was the second layer. Evan opened the leather portfolio. He removed the acknowledgement he had shown me before and another page prepared by an attorney for Mercer Ridge. He said the bank might avoid reporting the matter as suspected fraud if I confirmed that he had authority to begin the application. The house would be removed. A different investor might replace me. Marlene could sell part of the acreage instead of the entire property. I asked, "And your job?" He said, "I may keep it if they believe this was a family misunderstanding." Marlene said, "One signature can stop all of this." I answered, "One signature started all of this." That was the third layer. I asked Evan whether he had told Marlene about the apartment. Marlene looked at him. I asked whether he had told her about the draft separation proposal that left any future debt on my house. Evan said the draft had never been final. I asked whether his plan to leave me became final, before or after he needed my retirement income. He had no answer. Marlene turned toward him and said, "You told me she knew the marriage was over." I said, "No." He told each of us the version that made us useful. That was the fourth layer. Evan stepped closer. He said, "Nora, I know you are angry, but if you refuse this, Mom loses Mercer Ridge and I lose my career. Is that what you want?" At that moment, I want you to answer honestly. Would you sign to protect people who had used your name, or would you protect the one thing they had not managed to take, your own word? I already knew my answer. I said, "I want the record to say what happened." Then I went inside and returned with a file-stamped copy of my divorce petition and the written confirmation from the lender that the application was under fraud review. I handed the divorce copy to Evan. I told him formal service had been arranged through the proper process and that my attorney would handle all communication about property, accounts, and the marriage. His face lost what little color remained. He said, "You filed already." I said, "I filed after I learned that you had treated my future as a repayment source." Marlene whispered my name. I looked at her. She said, "You are destroying this family over paperwork." I answered, "No. Paperwork is where your family recorded what it was willing to do." She said I could choose mercy. I said mercy did not require me to certify a lie. Evan held the petition at his side. He asked whether there was any path back. I thought about the first years of our marriage. I thought about dinners after long shifts, drives through the hill country, and the way he once waited outside a deployment terminal with coffee in both hands. I did not need to pretend those memories were false. I only needed to stop using them as payment for the present. I said, "You did not lose me on the phone. You lost me each time you decided my consent could be supplied later." He looked down. Marlene said, "You never wanted to be one of us." For the first time, the accusation did not reach me. I answered, I wanted to belong. I did not know the entrance fee was signing away myself. No one spoke. A warm wind moved through the live oak near the driveway. Somewhere down the block, a lawn sprinkler clicked back and forth. Samuel Broom had stopped moving. Evan placed the unsigned acknowledgement back into the portfolio. Marlene picked up the patio chair and returned it to its place beside the door. Even then, she could not leave furniture out of order. They walked to their cars. Before Evan opened his door, he turned around. He said, I am sorry. I asked, for what? He stared at the pavement. He said, for believing I could fix it after I got what I needed. It was the first apology he gave that named the harm. It was also too late to change my decision. I watched both cars leave. Then I went inside, locked the new deadbolt, and moved the blue Dutch oven away from the coat closet. I placed it on the kitchen table. For the first time since the wedding, it looked less like evidence and more like a choice waiting to be made. The weeks after that were quieter than people expect a scandal to be. No police cars came to the house. No television reporter waited near the mailbox. No one was led away from a wedding venue in handcuffs. Real consequences often arrive by certified mail. Hill Country Capital closed the application and confirmed that no debt, lien, or guarantee would be attributed to me. The lender removed the unauthorized inquiry after reviewing my dispute. Renee Castillo called once more to tell me that the internal file had been referred to the legal and risk departments of the bank. She could not discuss personnel decisions or any investigation involving Evan. I told her I understood. 2 weeks later, Evan resigned from the bank. He said through our attorneys that resignation had been his choice. A former colleague later told Lauren that the choice had come after the bank offered him very few alternatives. I never tried to learn more. There is a point at which gathering facts stops protecting you and starts keeping you tied to the people who created them. Marlene did not receive the refinancing. She listed the back acreage for sale first. It was not enough. By December, she placed Mercer Ridge itself on the market. A company from Austin bought the property and kept it as an event venue under a different name. The oak trees remained, the stone hall remained, the sign with the Mercer name came down. Marlene told church friends that I had destroyed her legacy. The numbers said otherwise. The debt existed before I knew about it. The overdue vendors existed before the wedding. The balloon date existed before my name entered the application. Refusing to become collateral did not create the risk. It prevented the risk from being transferred to me. That distinction became important whenever guilt tried to make an argument. Patricia warned me that guilt would be one of the best remaining tools available to Evan. She was right. He sent messages through his attorney asking whether we could pause the divorce while he found new work. He offered counseling. He offered to sign an agreement promising never to use my financial information again. He offered to repay the cost of the credit monitoring service I did not need because the freeze was free. Each offer addressed a consequence. None addressed the character that produced it. I continued with the case. The financial review took time. Evan had not succeeded in placing a lien on the house, but his investment in Mercer Ridge, our joint accounts, and his hidden apartment deposit all had to be documented. Patricia requested records through formal channels. We negotiated a settlement that left the house with me, divided the marital savings, and kept his venue investment and related losses on his side of the ledger. I did not seek to ruin him. I did insist that his private gamble remain his private loss. The court could not finish the divorce until the required waiting period had passed. By the time every disclosure was complete and every page was signed properly, more than 4 months had gone by. The final hearing took place on a gray January morning at the courthouse in Bexar County. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. A clerk called our names. The judge reviewed the settlement and asked whether I had entered it voluntarily. I said yes. He asked whether I believed the marriage could be repaired. I looked at Evan across the aisle. He had lost weight. His suit fit poorly at the shoulders. For a moment, I saw the man from the financial workshop, the one who had warned a room full of military families never to sign a document they had not read. I said no. The judge approved the agreement. A marriage that had lasted 13 years ended in less time than one of my weekly logistics briefings. Outside the courtroom, Evan caught up with me near the elevators. He said he did not expect me to forgive him. I told him forgiveness was no longer the issue. He asked what was. I said access. I could stop carrying anger without giving him another key, another password, another chance to speak for me. I could remember the good years without treating them as a contract that renewed forever. He nodded slowly. Then he said, I wish I had understood that trust is not a reserve you can spend and replace later. I answered, so do I. The elevator arrived. He stepped into one car. I waited for the next. That was the last private conversation we had. Lauren and I did not become close overnight. Honesty does not require pretending that repair is immediate. She wrote me a letter in February. The envelope contained no defense of Marlene, no explanation about stress, and no request that I understand how difficult the wedding had been for her. She wrote that she had spent years treating silence as neutrality. She now understood that silence often protects the person with the most power. She apologized for knowing I might be excluded and saying nothing. She apologized for allowing Maisie to be the bravest person at the rehearsal. At the bottom, she added a note from Maisie. The note said, I saved your place card because Grandma put it in the trash, and that was rude. Taped beneath the note was the cream-colored card with my name written in dark green ink, Nora Whitaker. The card had a faint crease through the middle, but the name was clear. I held it for a long time. Then I placed it in the same folder as the loan documents, not because it was evidence of what the Mercers had done, because it was evidence that one child had seen the truth before the adults were willing to say it. I wrote back to Lauren. I told her an apology without a defense was a useful beginning. I told her I hoped she and Daniel would build a marriage where difficult facts could enter the room without being punished. I told Maisie that saving the card had mattered to me. After that, Lauren and I exchanged occasional messages. Nothing forced, nothing ceremonial. She told me Daniel had encouraged her to begin counseling. She told me she had stepped away from managing events for Marlene. She told me Maisie had joined the youth aviation program and could now identify more aircraft than most adults. I sent birthday cards. She sent a photograph at Christmas. That was enough for the time being. Marlene never apologized again. She moved into a smaller house near Kerrville after Mercer Ridge sold. According to Lauren, she continued telling people that the family had been betrayed. Perhaps she believed it. Some people can survive almost any loss except an accurate description of their own choices. I stopped needing her to understand. At work, hurricane season ended. The portable refrigeration units reached Corpus Christi. The young captain corrected his weight calculations and later became one of the best planners in the office. Rosa retired in March and gave me her dry erase marker as if it were a ceremonial sword. She said, "You always preferred the red pencil, but this one has seniority." I kept both. I had planned to retire the following spring, even before the loan application turned my pension into someone else's repayment plan. For a while, I considered delaying retirement simply to prove the timing belonged to me. Then I realized that letting Evan influence the decision in either direction would give him more authority than he deserved. I reviewed my finances. I spoke with a retirement counselor. I considered the work I still wanted to do. I submitted my papers for the date I had chosen years earlier. On my final morning in uniform, I woke before the alarm. The house was quiet. The blue Dutch oven sat on the kitchen counter. I had finally opened the box in January. The pot was deep blue with a white interior, heavy enough to last longer than most arguments. The note I had written for Lauren was still tucked beneath the lid. I removed the note. Then I carried the pot to a community kitchen that supported families after floods, fires, and sudden displacement. I had worked with the kitchen during emergency operations and knew its director, a widow named Helen Brooks. Helen looked at the unopened pot and asked whether it had a story. I said, it had an assignment that changed. She ran one hand over the lid. She said, then we will give it useful work. That answer pleased me. My retirement ceremony was held in a maintenance hangar with folding chairs, 2 flags, and a microphone that squealed every time someone touched it. Air Force ceremonies are formal until the equipment reminds everyone who is in charge. Rosa returned for the event. Curtis Neal came. Samuel sat in the second row wearing a bolo tie and the expression of a man who had found 3 safety violations before breakfast. People from 3 assignments and 2 decades filled the chairs. A general said kind things about hurricane response and readiness rates. A young airman presented me with a shadow box. Someone read the dates of my service. I listened to my career reduced to a sequence of assignments and awards. The part that mattered came afterward. The community kitchen had set up long tables outside the hangar. Helen and her volunteers served beef stew, green beans, cornbread, and peach cobbler. The air smelled like black pepper and warm bread. At the center of the serving line sat the blue Dutch oven. Steam lifted when Helen removed the lid. I laughed when I saw it. She said, "This pot feeds more people than anything else we own. It holds heat like it has something to prove." I told her that sounded familiar. The first image I remember from that afternoon is the pot that never reached a wedding, filled to the rim and feeding people who had shown up for me. The second is Samuel, sitting beside a 19-year-old airman and teaching him the correct way to sharpen a pocket knife, while Rosa confiscated both knives until after lunch. The third is a little girl running across the edge of the hangar with a cream-colored place card in one hand. Maisie had grown taller since I last saw her. Her hair was pulled into 2 braids. Lauren and Daniel followed behind, carrying trays of cornbread. I had not known they were coming. Maisie stopped in front of me, slightly out of breath. She said, "Mom told me you were having a party with assigned seats." I looked at the rows of folding chairs and laughed. I said, "The Air Force assigns almost everything." She held up the old wedding place card. She had placed it inside a clear plastic sleeve so the crease would not worsen. Then she walked to the long table, found the empty chair beside Rosa, and set the card in front of it. Nora Whitaker. Lauren stood a few feet away, uncertain whether she was welcome. For years, I had watched her wait for someone else to decide what courage cost. This time, she had come without permission from Marlene, without a prepared speech, and without asking me to erase what happened. She simply said, "We brought cornbread." Maisie said, "Stu needs it." I looked at the blue pot, the saved name card, and the people gathered around the table. Then I pulled out the chair beside me. I said, "Sit down before Rosa assigns you a task." Rosa called from the table, "Too late. We need more tea." Lauren smiled. It was not the strained smile from the wedding photographs. It was smaller and real. She sat. Nothing about that moment restored the old family. I did not want the old family restored. The old arrangement depended on one person controlling the room and everyone else measuring the danger of speaking. What began that afternoon was different. It was not forgiveness demanded as proof of goodness. It was not reconciliation performed for an audience. It was one honest visit, one saved card, one tray of cornbread, and one chair pulled back from the table. That was enough. After retirement, I began working part-time with a regional emergency management cooperative. I still made movement plans. I still inspected manifests. I still carried the red grease pencil in my shirt pocket, though my shirts no longer had rank on them. Samuel still watched the street from his garage. Rosa called whenever she heard about a planning failure and wanted someone to appreciate it properly. Curtis sent me photographs of badly secured cargo from highways across Texas. Lauren and I met for lunch every few months. Maisie joined a civil aviation program and announced that she intended to become a pilot, an engineer, or a woman who told adults when they were wrong. I told her the third option would remain useful in any profession. Evan rebuilt a quieter life somewhere north of San Antonio. I heard he found work outside banking. I wished him no harm. I also did not search for updates. The Mercer name disappeared from the stone entrance at Mercer Ridge, but the land did not vanish. Another couple married beneath the oak trees. Another family ate dinner in the hall. Places survive the people who mistake ownership for permanence. Looking back, the wedding was not the day my marriage ended. It was the day several hidden records became visible at once. A place card showed who had been removed. A television segment showed where I had actually planned to be. A loan packet showed what my husband believed he could take. A credit inquiry showed how far the plan had gone. A child showed that silence was never the only choice. For most of my career, I believed accountability meant knowing where every item came from, who signed for it, and where it was supposed to go. I understand it differently now. Accountability is also knowing which burdens are yours and refusing the ones someone labels with your name. I did not save Mercer Ridge. I saved my house. I did not save his career. I saved my word. I did not preserve the family as Marlene had arranged it. I found out which people could sit with the truth and stay. The Blue Dutch oven is still at the community kitchen. Helen says it has served thousands of meals. The cream plays card sits on a shelf in my study beside the red grease pencil. One reminds me that a gift can find better work than the purpose first assigned to it. The other reminds me that belonging is not established by a seating chart, a last name, or a signature placed on the wrong page. The people worth keeping do not ask you to become collateral for their comfort. They learn your real name, they wait for your answer. And when you arrive, they leave the chair where you can reach it.